I have to admit, when I opened the text this morning and read this passage, I was not very excited to talk about it. It just seemed like another passage of the same thing that had been happening throughout the last few chapters. This time, Paul himself getting stoned and dragged out of the city. But then I recognized in this text something that is of incredible importance for us today. It is a distillation of the call of the church to be with one another in difficult times. There is a two-part movement here, if you notice it when you read this text. There's a witnessing of woundedness, and there's a strengthening of souls. And I think that this is indicative of our work today, particularly as we move through a very difficult time together as a church and as a world through this pandemic. I want to note here, though, before we get into the encouragement that they shared with one another and the strengthening of souls that they experienced in their gathering, that they did not overlook the pain and the woundedness that they were experiencing. In fact, it was their witnessing presence that seems to be the healing factor in this passage. If you'll look here, when Paul was stoned and dragged out of the city, supposing that he was dead, but when the disciples surrounded him, he got up. It was their witnessing presence that strengthened him. They saw his woundedness. They surrounded him in his pain and in his brokenness. There is a very important aspect here of what we do before we move into the encouragement of one another through painful and difficult circumstances. A witnessing of woundedness, a surrounding of those who are experiencing pain. There's actually no prayer that's offered in this text. There's no miracle working that's offered in this text, even though Paul seems to be next to dead here. It's the disciples surrounding him that was the strengthening factor. And then they gathered together not to recount their losses, not to bespeak their failures as a movement and cry with one another over all the things they should have been and weren't, not to give a litany of their pain, but to encourage one another and strengthen their souls, and then move into the ministry that was ahead of them. There they strengthened the souls of the disciples and encouraged them to continue in the faith, verse 22. Verse 27, when they arrived, they called the church together and related all that God had done with them. This is an incredibly important role that we must play together as well in the coming days. It is a particular call of the church that when we are together with one another, we spend time encouraging one another, strengthening our souls in community. But this is not a Pollyanna-ish, looking on the bright side kind of soul strengthening. In fact, that's no kind of soul strengthening at all. This encouragement and soul strengthening in community emerges directly out of the disciples surrounding Paul in his brokenness and woundedness and pain. So here in this passage that I almost overlooked today as being important at all is a two-part call of the church that could not be more important to us right now where we are in our world. Witnessing the woundedness of others and strengthening souls in community.